so this was my great luck. Right now, to let you know about some of the main results. Well, as you might guess from the cover of my book, the miracle of aggregation fails yet again. Once again, the miracle of aggregation does not work. Turns out that there are very large systematic disagreements between economists and the public. Right? Differences like night and day. Right, now, just to tell you the main patterns, first of all, there's a pattern that I call anti-market bias. So the public generally underestimates what I would call the social benefits of the market mechanism. Right, so economists are much more likely to think that markets have socially beneficial effects than the public does. Right, so one big effect. Just to give you a couple of random examples. Once I was giving this talk to a very Marxist-oriented economics department, and then at dinner I asked those guys, so what do you guys think about a market in human kidneys? Knowing that almost all economists think this is a good idea, I was curious what they would say. All right, a couple of the graduate students sort of said, I don't know. But the Marxist professor said, yes, we've got to do this. So, all right, wow, well, there's some consensus. Here's a policy that almost no non-economist thinks is a good idea, which is allowing people to sell their kidneys. Almost every economist thinks is a good idea. Why do economists think this is a good idea? Well, it turns out that almost every healthy human being has an extra kidney in their body that they don't need. And on the other hand, dialysis is really terrible. And yet kidney transplants very rarely come along. Right? There are way more people who want kidney transplants than there actually are healthy kidneys to give to them, because right now we only get them when somebody dies or when someone voluntarily hands over a kidney. Now, by the way, once you know that dialysis is really terrible, anyone inclined to go and run out here and donate a kidney to a stranger for free, that's legal. Probably not. However, what if you could get $10,000 for donating a kidney to a stranger? Maybe. Right? And remember, even if people in college are not too likely to hand over a kidney for $10,000, there's plenty of people on this earth who would love to hand over a healthy kidney for $10,000. People in other countries might be really happy to get $10,000 for that kidney. Okay, so this is just one controversial policy, but I think it does illustrate the different way that economists think. They say, look, there's a whole bunch of kidneys that are going to waste. There's people who desperately need them, and yet government says that you can't sell them. You can't sell them, right? Which leads to a whole bunch of people needlessly dying and a whole bunch of other people having kidneys they don't really need. Why not legalize that market so that we can get the kidneys from the people who've got them to the people who really need them? And by allowing exchange of funds, we can make people want to do it voluntarily. Why not? Okay. Or just one other example. Once when I was giving this talk, I had to drive down in the morning from my home in Northern Virginia down to Richmond. It's about a 2-hour drive, and traffic was backed up on the other side for about 10 miles. Right? And when I was doing this ride, I was thinking, wow, there's a problem that I don't normally see because I sleep in and go to work at 10. But anyway, here's a problem that people face every day, and yet every economist in the country knows how to solve this problem. Every economist in the country knows how to solve the problem of congestion. And that is to raise the price of driving during peak times from nothing to something. Or raise it from nothing to something, thereby encouraging people who don't really have to be driving during that time to drive at a different time. Okay, why not? Okay, so the one big pattern that you'll see in differences between economists and the public is what I call anti-market bias. Another one is what I call anti-foreign bias, tendency to get especially nervous when foreigners are involved. So whether you're talking about products from foreigners or immigration from other countries, or if you're talking about foreign aid, these are all areas where non-economists tend to get really nervous when foreigners are involved, especially nervous. And so when you talk about trade between two Americans, non-economists may say, all right, well, maybe, all right, probably, I guess, both people benefit if they're both Americans. But what if one person is from America and the other one is from China? Doesn't that change everything? Economists say, no, it's really exactly the same. Non-economists have a lot of trouble believing this. They say, no, you don't understand. This is someone from China making money off of us. Yes, and we are also getting good toys from them. So it all works out. Okay. We can talk about this more during the Q&A if you want, so I'm a little pressed for time. Another big pattern that you see is what I call make-work bias. Economists tend to evaluate economic performance based upon production. Non-economists tend to evaluate it based upon employment. It seems very easy for people to fall into, but it's worth pointing out, well, so right now, what percentage of Americans are farmers? Maybe about 2%. So 150 years ago, most Americans would have been farmers. What is the difference? The difference is that almost all farmers lost their jobs. And why did they lose their jobs? Because we figured out a way for one farmer to feed, say, 50 people. Right? So back in the old days, one farmer might be able to feed, say, 1.2 people. So almost everyone had to be a farmer. Over time, we figured out ways for one farmer to grow more food. The result of this was that a lot of farmers lost their jobs and did something else. Right? If at the time you would ask an economist, what are these farmers supposed to do? Farming's all they know. Economists probably sort of said, well, if I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be giving you a lecture about it. I would be hiring those people. Right? They'll do something. Right? That doesn't sound very convincing, and yet something is exactly what happened. What happened was we built modern civilization using all the people who otherwise would have been farmers. Certainly in 1850 you wouldn't say they'll invent the internet or something like that. Who would have ever guessed that? All we can say is, look, if you go and use more labor than you have to accomplish what you're trying to do, you are wasting valuable labor that could have been used for something else. Right? And a last bias that you will notice in the data is what I call pessimistic bias. Non-economists are much more likely to economists to think that the world is in decline, is bad now, and is going to get even worse. Okay, now, of course, you may say, well, what about now? Right? Aren't conditions really bad? Well, even there, I'll say, well, bad compared to what? Bad compared to the very mild economic conditions of the post-war era. Yeah, that's probably true. Bad compared to, say, the way that things were even typically like 30 years ago? Not really so. I mean, even now, right, per capita GDP is much higher than it would have been 30 years ago. Right? So, yes, the conditions that we consider horrible now were what were considered normal when I was your age. So, worth pointing out. And we didn't have iPods. Right? Also. Right now, key question you may ask at this point is, couldn't the experts be biased? Isn't it possible that the experts are wrong? Yeah, that's absolutely possible. Right? It's possible and it's worth considering. Right? But you say, well, tell me why you don't trust them. You trust mathematicians, right? Why do you distrust economists? Well, normally there are a couple of specific reasons why people will say that they do not trust economists, and they basically come down to two different kinds of answers. So one of them is that, look, economists are rich, they got a lot of job security, they might even have tenure, which is also known as a dream job for life. They're white, they're male, they have all these other things going for them. So of course they think all these awful things. They think all these awful things that are in their interests but are not in the interest of the rest of society. Okay, so that's one story. The story is often called self-serving bias. Basically, people look at the world and say, whatever is good for me is good for the world. So the story is economists look at the world, they see what's good for them, and then they think everyone should want what they want. Okay, another story that people often tell about economists is that they're just a bunch of right-wing ideologues, and therefore you can't trust their views. Right? So the reason why they go into economics is that they are rabid free market Republicans, and therefore no one wants to go into economics who has any different kind of political view, and therefore we get this bizarre consensus among economists liking these policies. Okay, so that's another story that people have told. Okay. It turns out that when you actually test these views against the facts, and in the Survey of Americans and Economists, it's actually possible to test these stories. Because there's measurements of the income of the respondent, there's measurements of job security, measurements of your political party, measurements of your ideology, measurements of your race, your age, your gender, and so on. Okay, so we can actually go and see if the reason why economists think they're strange things is because they're economists or is it because of these other characteristics. Okay, it turns out that both of these stories fail very basic tests. First of all, self-serving bias explains at most 20% of a very large gap. So you can throw in the entire kitchen sink of every possible reason why you might think that economists would have different interests than the rest of the public, and still, or more than 80% of a very large belief gap remains. And even that is probably actually overstating the case for self-serving bias, because very often the signs are wrong. Right? So for example, economists are much less worried about the effects of welfare on the economy than most people. Right? And it's not that economists are likely to go on welfare. I don't know any economists on welfare. I don't know any economists who ever had, well, actually, I take it back. I knew one graduate student who went on welfare so we could study more economics, but in Britain. So I'm going on the dole to study more economics. I'd like to take a year off just to learn, and the welfare state will support me. But other than him, don't know of any economists who's on welfare. So why exactly is it that economists have much less negative views of welfare than the non-economists? Maybe it's because they know that very little money is actually spent on the poor. Perhaps it's that. Okay, so anyway, self-serving bias doesn't work out very well. And the story of ideological bias, that economists are a bunch of right-wing Republicans, totally crashes and burns because it's not even true. Actually, the typical economist is a moderate Democrat. Typical economist is a moderate Democrat who thinks that downsizing is good, free trade is good, that fluctuations in the price of gas are caused by supply and demand, thinks a whole bunch of things that other Democrats disagree with, but he believes them not because of his right-wing views, but despite his left-wing views.